class a few days ago, I was able to have the chance to play the Game of Thrones board game. The game is very interesting in not only the mechanics of itself, but actually the interactiveness between the players and how that actually drives the story and the narrative that you are going for within the game. The mechanics are very complex at points, and the game at times can be seemingly difficult to actually set up, and it takes a while to set up, but that's besides the point. We're going actually into the gameplay and what the interactiveness of the story itself. So when the story begins, you can pick through the 7 houses that are actually represented in Westeros. Now, the houses that we picked were Baratheon, Lannister, Greyjoy, and I played Stark. Now, 2 of us had actually read the books and watched the show, and the other 2 had not read the books or watched the show at all. So it was very interesting because 2 of us knew how the story should have been played out and how our houses would play these certain situations and how they would actually go with what the story was being presented. But the other 2, they could actually play any way they wanted, and they just were having fun. They didn't know how they were supposed to interact with the story, which made for a very interesting gameplay because they actually started playing within how their characters would actually in the show would have played. And it's very interesting because I did not play a correct playstyle for being Stark. I decided I was just going to stay in the north and not bother anybody, but I quickly realized I was being isolated, but I decided, you know what, I'm just going to commit to this because why not? I'm already in the north, let's just stay in the north. Something happens, it doesn't happen, oh well. But this actually calls for an interesting story because the story that we were telling was pretty much Greyjoy and Lannister were always talking about how they were going to have an alliance and take down Baratheon because I wasn't a threat. I was just like, I'm in the north, I really can't help anyone. But Baratheon was able to just be like, well, I think I can take them on. And Baratheon was able to actually pretty much dominate the entire game. And the story really wasn't about these houses trying to take down Baratheon. It was the story of Baratheon just completely annihilating everyone without even having to go into combat that often. And that was what was really interesting, was the game isn't heavily combat based. And that was very interesting. It was more of the story was told between the players discussing, just being like, you can trust me, you can't trust me. And then we finally got to a bid for power stage where I was able to bid enough power to actually sit on the Iron Throne and decide ties when people were bidding for power and whatnot, because you can't decide ties in combat. And it was just really interesting that the story that we were telling was different from the show, because it was the story of Stark staying in the north, just doing his own thing, Greyjoy deciding to just kind of wander about, and Lannister and Baratheon kind of trying to fight for power. And the end, Baratheon was able to dominate all of us and have, in 10 rounds, just have the 6 castles at the end of it. You need 7 to win, but he had 6 at the end of 10 rounds, so we're just like, he wins. And that was the story, was really, and that's what was interesting, was I believe if we were to play again, we would tell a very different story than just the story of Baratheon being able to annihilate everyone. Because now that we've played it once through, we know kind of how to tell our own story of what we really need to do with the characters to help progress the story for ourselves and make our own story, instead of just playing into the world of Westeros itself. And that's very interesting. And that's what I really like about games, is when you can develop your own story outside of the actual game, play how in the story that's already been established, and kind of go your own route. And that's very interesting. And that's something I would like to explore further.